Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. You know that feeling when you're trying to book a trip, too many choices, too much fine print, no real way to know if you're actually getting the best deal? Smart Travel helps you skip that stress and book with confidence. NerdWallet's travel journalists break down the pros and cons of travel decisions, like when lounge access is worth paying for, how a travel agent could save you money, and which hotel loyalty programs give you the best value. So before you book, learn how to get the most out of your travel dollars. Follow Smart Travel on your favorite podcast app, and stay tuned later in the show for a special segment on travel.
If fashion is your thing, eBay is it. eBay's where I find all my favorites, from handbags to iconic streetwear, all authenticated. For real. This time, a little Supreme, some Gucci. I even have that vintage Prada on my watch list. That's why eBay's my go-to for all my go-tos. Yeah, eBay, the place for new, pre-loved, vintage, and rare fashion. eBay, things people love.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest, Netflix's Incel Tragedy Adolescence edition. It's Wednesday, March 26th. 2025. On today's show, Adolescence is a huge hit on Netflix. The British import follows the story of a 13-year-old boy accused of murdering a classmate. It stars and was co-created and co-written by Stephen Graham, best known as an actor, but his writing here is marvelous. And then Lady Gaga returns with a new record, MAYHEM. We discussed this, some people are calling it comeback album, and the career of the great Gaga with Slate's own Chris Molanphy. And finally, what should universities do in the face of an assault on their core mission? The question has gone from urgent to code red in the face of Columbia's capitulation to Trump and his administration's exorbitant demands. First, we are joined by Rebecca Onion, a Slate editor and writer and very close friend of this program. Rebecca, welcome back to the show.
I always love to come on the Gabfest.
Well, we love having you. And of course, Dana Stevens is the film critic for Slate. Hey, Dana.
Hey, hey.
Jamie is the 13-year-old boy at home asleep when a small battalion of heavily armed police break down the front door of his parents' house.
Police! Get down on the floor!
What's going on? I've got you!
They begin ransacking the premises, take him to the station with his father, and book him for murder. Thus begins a 4-part Netflix series called Adolescence. All 4 episodes of this show are filmed in a single continuous take. The flow is mesmerizing, and for all the reasons. It's a procedural in which no procedural detail is spared, and it fixes the viewer with a question. Could this angelic-seeming boy have brutally murdered his female classmate? Now, firmly atop the charts in most of the major territories, the show Adolescence is a phenomenon for balancing the heartbreaking tragedy of Jamie against a serious but undidactic look at the effects of social media on adolescence. The show stars Stephen Graham as Jamie's father, a plumber, and it features a tour de force debut by Owen Cooper as Jamie. In the clip we're about to hear, it comes from the 3rd episode where Jamie and a court-appointed psychologist played by Aaron Doherty go back and forth. Let's listen.
You don't know. You're not. You're pretty.
This isn't about me, Jamie.
What? You don't think you're pretty?
I'm not the interesting person in this room.
You don't think you're pretty? You do think I'm ugly?
I haven't passed judgment on either of those things. If you think about it, for very good reason.
Oh, for very good reason.
I want to understand you.
To understand my understanding of my understanding of my understanding.
Yes.
The other bloke is much more easy.
Okay.
Him checking whether to stand was much easier. Whether I understand what I did. Look, fuck off! I didn't fucking say that! You fucking putting words in my mouth! Oh, it's like a fucking trap in here!
Hey,
Jamie!
Rebecca, you wrote on the show. Talk about what about it you found so powerful.
I watched it and wrote about it before sort of the critical consensus started rolling in, which is basically like 100% Rotten Tomatoes. We all love it. Like this is going to win all the prizes kind of feelings. And I feel reassured that I have a good critical sense because I had that same feeling when I watched it, which is just like, this is something totally new, totally different. As a person who thinks a lot about social media, phones, the internet, their effect on youth, their effect on people in general, and their way that they relate to each other, I think it's probably fair to say that almost everyone is interested in that these days. As a person with a child who doesn't yet have a phone and isn't yet on the internet, but is on the precipice of that, I obviously think about it a lot. So I've read, I subscribe to Substacks where parents are talking about how to handle kids on the internet. I read The Anxious Generation, all of these sort of like high and low points of the discourse around phones and kids. And Adolescence is the piece of art that I think best gets at the hopelessness of understanding what the heck to do. The hopelessness, the sort of like the alienation, I think, that a lot of parents feel in relationship to this world of their kids being on phones and kids being on the internet. And very particularly, I really love that it doesn't present it as like a open and shut case. Jamie got radicalized by the manosphere. I mean, he sort of did. We find out through the course of the series, but it's a combination of factors. It's the stuff that he encounters online, the friends that he has, the school that he goes to. Maybe it's partly his dad. Maybe it's partly his mom. It's just, it all kind of poured into this one boy's head and created this situation. And the show is excellent because it never 100% commits to the idea that this is an internet problem. It's a combination of problems that have resulted in an awful result in this one particular situation. And I don't know of any other art about this issue that has presented it so deftly. That's why I loved it. But I'd love to hear what you guys think, because I recommended that we do it for this segment. So hopefully you liked it.
Yeah, I don't think we're probably going to have any dissension from the Rotten Tomatoes score here, because it's a pretty impressive feat that this show manages to do what it does without really any touch of didacticism or, after school special kind of feeling about it, which the material would seem so dangerously close to. There's two things that it pulls off that I think are very difficult to pull off. One is, as you were saying, Rebecca, just presenting this material. I mean, ultimately, this is, I think, a pretty powerful critique of the current state of social media and the potential for radicalization. That's not all it is. As you say, it's a lot more than that. But it certainly very strongly is that. And the creators, the director, Philip Barantini, and Stephen Graham, who co-stars and co-wrote it, have both said that they started off with that idea before they even knew exactly what they were going to do with it. They wanted to do something about, violence, youth violence, and then that sort of expanded to the manosphere. And they did sort of, in a way, set out to make a document of warning. So how does it avoid that didacticism? I mean, I would need to watch it again, which would be a very harrowing experience. It is a tough watch for sure, but a mesmerizing one. To get at exactly how it does that. But I think a huge part of it is ellipsis. I mean, especially for a Netflix show, which as we've talked about many times on this podcast, tend toward the over-explained, I mean, it's the whole second screen phenomenon, right? Is about how little can you pay attention to a show and still get across whatever it's trying to put over. This show is not that at all. It requires sustained attention and focus, and it's quite elliptical. I mean, you only see Jamie in the first and the third episodes. You hear his voice in the fourth episode. You don't hear him or see him at all in the second episode. Same thing with his family. You see them in the first, then they drop out, then they come back. There's a little bit of a sense as you're watching it, if you're used to the rhythm of your average TV show, that you're not quite seeing enough, that there's corners that you can't see around. And that ellipsis is very deliberate and is what makes it, in the end, so powerful and so not messagey, I think. And then the other thing, and I'll be quick because I want to hear what Steve has to say, is the form. The fact that it does this one take thing, which I would argue, and lots of film critics have said this in the past few years, I mean, the whole oneer fever has gotten a little bit absurd in television and movies. Not that it can't be done in a wonderful, sophisticated way. In fact, this very director, Philip Barantini, made a movie starring Stephen Graham called Boiling Point. That was the first time they worked together. That was a oneer, a whole movie that was one take. And it's great. And they wanted to experiment with that form again for the TV show. But, I think oneers can be show-offy. I don't love that incredibly long 18-minute shot in the bear that everybody talked about. It seemed like it was more about its own virtuosity than actually telling a story in a way it needed to be told. But these oneers are really smoothly done, such that it was about 20 minutes into the first episode before I realized that it was one take and not just a series of long takes. It's very discreet and elegant the way the camera follows people around, especially in intimate settings like that incredible third episode, which I'm sure we'll talk about more. That's really just a two-hander between the kid and the shrink. I have more to say, but Steve, I'm going to throw it over to you first.
Yeah, no, I assent completely. It's a mind-blowingly good show. A couple things. One is that it is remarkable that it avoids being gimmicky, even though it uses a gimmicky technique. It's not gimmicky at all in the execution. It's immersive, and you're caught up in the micro shifts and macro shifts in emotion and feeling that the characters are experiencing in real time. It's that real time feeling that's important to, feeling that this isn't a kind of edited, episodic, presented. There's no sort of sense of retrospective aestheticization or distance to the thing that is happening, right? It is happening to you as it is happening to them, in this way that makes you feel like an eavesdropper or even participant, which is really powerful. And secondly, the topicality of it never overwhelms it at all. And on that latter point, what I would say is that shows a respect to the fact that human beings ultimately are black boxes. When you begin to talk in terms of causality, you are always only going to be guessing about what's inside the black box, why one kid radicalizes, why of the kids who radicalize, that subset of boys who radicalize. I mean, the boys saying grotesque things online, consuming porn, being misogynistic is one group. A subset of them are radicalized in the direction of being some kind of an incel or red pillar. A tiny subset of them act out violently. A tiny subset of them act out violently in this way. Why one is different from the other? The phone obviously is the common element to all of them, right? So the idea that the iPhone or social media is the important thing to be concentrating on. So there's just this ultimate respect to the utter singularity of each human experience. And this kid is first of all, performance by Owen Cooper is astonishing. It's his debut. He's never been in anything. He just so is exactly a 13-year-old boy. It's like Adolescence has started, but it's very equivocal. You're still fundamentally a child. He hasn't really fully gone through puberty, as I read it. In some sense, manhood is totally distant to him. Something's unfolding inside this kid's body that he's not entirely in control of. There's something sweet and angelic about him. He insists he's ugly. He's not. He's actually an arrestingly beautiful boy. He has all kinds of esteem issues. He has no idea who he is. Like, the show is attempting to show you in a non-didactic way all of the things that went into his fragility, which is ultimately human and very affecting. There are long stretches of that tour de force third episode. It's one of the best hours of TV I've ever seen, where you sort of forget what this kid did, right? And the way you get brought back to that is so utterly wrenching. So ultimately, yes, it was so funny that they started with this kind of, agenda-driven, notion of what this TV show should be. But I think in part because Stephen Graham is an actor, it's like, at the end of the day, you have to tell a very different kind of truth through the medium of performance in some sense. And they did that.
I have one thing to add about it being Owen Cooper's first role. Not only that, but apparently the third episode that we keep talking about, the two-hander with him and the psychiatrist, was the first one they filmed, meaning that was his first time in front of a camera.
That's incredible.
I mean, it was the fourth take that they used, but that was like his first week sitting down to act in front of a camera. And he really is just so astonishing and has absolutely none of the kind of well-trained child actor vibes, that can sometimes happen with a performer that young. He looks even younger than he is. I think he was 15 when they shot the episode. He's supposed to be 13. But yeah, they did a great job also of choosing someone who really seems like a child. He could be 12.
The fact that this is a show about 13-year-olds, which I love, the opening credits have sort of images of the kids that are in the narrative, but they're slightly younger, like they're 8 or 9. They're playing with the idea of this being sort of like a fraught passage that they're going through. Like they have these like childhood days right behind them, and now they're coming into something else. And it's clear that at least for Jamie, he perceived everything that was going to lie before him as like somehow more fixed or more solid than it actually is. Like, you really get in the conversation that he has with the psychologist in episode 3, how much evaluating he's been doing about his own worth and his own attractiveness. Really, that's like the manosphere stuff, is like he's come across these concepts about how certain men will always get the most women, the 80-20 principle that he or someone else in the investigation mentions, the idea that 80% of women will go for 20% of men.
Red Bull's like, I see the truth. It's a call to action by the manosphere.
Manosphere?
Which is where the 100 comes in, the 80-20 rule.
Adam, listen, my brain can't take all this. I don't know what you're talking about. Just break it down.
80% of women are attracted to 20% of men. Woman, you must trick them because you'll never get them in a normal way. 80% of women are cut off or she's saying he's an incel, Dad.
It seems that he's fixed it in his mind at way too early, because Owen Cooper is so cute and sweet looking, you want to kind of reach into the show and be like, you have so much ahead of you, don't fix it so early. Don't be so sure about what's going to happen. But his surety has led him to this place where he has done something awful that can't be taken back. And yeah, I think that it's not just a show about phones, although it is a show about phones. It's also just a show about being that age, I think, in a way that's very powerfully done and well done. And some of the only sort of critiques that I've seen of the show, if there's a 98% Rotten Tomatoes, or maybe it's even 100% Rotten Tomatoes, the critiques that I've seen, our old colleague Inku Kang at The New Yorker did write a piece kind of arguing that it's too much from the point of view of the parents. You really don't see anything from the point of view of the kids, except for maybe a little bit in the second episode, which takes place in the school, where you do see get to sort of connect a little bit, although you're totally disconnected in the end from the friend of the girl who got killed, the girl who Jamie killed. But really, it's a show from the point of view of adulthood, I think. But I kind of don't have a problem with that. I also don't have that much of a problem with the fact that you don't really know that much about the girl. But what do you guys think about those two critiques? That it is sort of a mystery looking in from the upper generation on this generation.
I mean, I think I already answered that a little bit in my comment about the elliptical nature of the storytelling. I think the world of the kids, and particularly Jamie's world, is supposed to be a black box. If it wasn't a black box, it wouldn't be the same show. So I wouldn't say I have that critique at all. In fact, I think the weakest of the 4 episodes, although it's still very good television, is the second one, where the 2 detectives visit the school. In a way, just because it's the most familiar, it's like the 2 cops who are partners who, stoically investigate a crime. You feel like you're in a world that you understand somewhat. I do think that the rendering of the school is apparently horrifying. It's not, it's a, in between quotes, nice school, right? I mean, there's school uniforms. It's, apparently a respectable place to send your child. One of the detectives' own kid is a student at the school. And yet you get a sense that it's really like a prison, that there's no real learning going on, that the entire day is just about control and surveillance. And, and also that the internet and phones are so present everywhere that there's no escape even when you're in class. Yeah, that's maybe the weakest episode just because it has the least Jamie and it has none of his family.
Oh yeah.
But all 4 of them hang together, I think, in exactly the way they were meant to, that you peek at a different corner each time.
All right, well, we're in total agreement. If you haven't checked it out, you absolutely should. It's Adolescence. It's on Netflix. If there's one thing to learn from the entertainment industry, it's just how easy it is to earn a reputation, even if it doesn't reflect who celebrities really are. For example, everybody thinks that Discover is a card that isn't widely accepted, but in reality, it's accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. Yeah, 99%. So maybe now you'll think twice before judging a book by its cover. Unless it's a celebrity cookbook, in that case, judge away. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Lady Gaga's sixth solo album, Mayhem, is here. She, of course, has been a huge pop star since 2009, a movie star since 2018. Star is Born stipulated. She is a star. The key word here is star. But the Terrible Joker sequel and the accompanying album, Harlequin, they're not regarded as career highs, let's put it that way, so maybe something of a comeback is in order. To discuss this new record, we are joined by Slate's own Chris Molanphy, chartologist, host of the great podcast Hit Parade, and a man who is always at his station. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was very kind.
She threw a lot of influences at this record. Gaga did.
Yeah.
She cited herself Prince, David Bowie, Nine Inch Nails, Radiohead, Earth, Wind and Fire. Chris, let's immediately begin by narrowing this down. It's quite the palimpsest we're dealing with here sound-wise, but let's just pick one track to kick off with.
Well, okay, in a way, there have been multiple, quote, lead singles for this album, which is one of the strange things about it. She's been announcing it for weeks, really months now, and we could play the current lead single, which is called Abracadabra, which I think is probably the most sort of up the middle Gaga does Gaga kind of song. So why don't we play a little bit of Abracadabra, which is in the top 40 right now as we speak.
Chris, I gotta say, I didn't know I liked this song until I saw Rebecca Onion grooving to it on camera just now.
I love it. It makes me dance.
She's at the club. Oh my God. That was awesome. Chris, what do you think of this record?
The thing about Mayhem is that a lot of it is Gaga does Gaga as well as Gaga does everybody else. That's Gaga is very aware that this is a comeback record for her. This is her first sort of straight up Lady Gaga studio album, and there are asterisks all over that because she put out other product in this time period. But her first straight up Lady Gaga album in 5 years since the pandemic, when she released the album Chromatica. And what kind of made me laugh when this album came out was that everybody was saying is, oh, Gaga is back. It's a comeback. And I was sort of like, didn't you all say that when Chromatica came out in 2020? A lot of people were, feeding the line, Gaga is back in 2020. Chromatica was kind of a straight up house/dance album. There wasn't a single ballad on it. It was very, consistent in tempo. It wanted to take you to the club. Of course, ironically, it came out at the very height of the pandemic. And so like the Dua Lipa album, Future Nostalgia, which came out right around the same time, it was a disco record for people who were stuck at home. And this one is, again, sort of Gaga looking back at her history, but it's far more eclectic. It actually has a couple of ballads at the end, including one we'll definitely talk about, which was sort of the accidental lead single to this album. And it sort of finds Gaga exploring all of the influences that have infused her career over the years, whether it's David Bowie, Prince, Madonna, and frankly, her own damn self. There are callbacks to her own material. There's even a piece of one track that reminds me of Gwen Stefani. And there's one track we should definitely talk about in which she's pretty clearly trying to ape Taylor Swift, but we should, get to all of that. So yeah, it's an eclectic album to say the least.
Chris, I assume when you say there's a Taylor Swift-esque track, you're talking about How Bad Do You Want Me?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we need to listen to a little bit of that because honestly, if you told me that was a Taylor Swift song and I didn't recognize Gaga's voice in it, I would 100% have believed it.
There's even a moment in, I believe it's the second verse, where she kind of sings like Taylor Swift. And it blew my mind when I heard it. It's like, wow, you are not trying to be subtle here. And I ain't mad at it, personally. I think it's a pretty damn catchy record. And I think it could be a hit if she chose to push it as a radio single. And the other thing I'll tell listeners who are enjoying this track is that if the synth popness of it also sounds familiar, it has widely been attributed to Gaga, if not sampling, quite possibly interpolating the classic early 80s synth pop song Only You by Yaz. So that's also an influence on this track. So maybe we should play a little bit of How Bad Do You Want Me?
The good girl in your dreams is meant your loving me. I know you wish that she was me. How bad do you want me?
Chris, I was going to get to this later, but this is just too apt a place to ask it. She was asked by a journalist if she were, quote unquote, reheating nachos with this record. She had a great answer at the ready. She was like, they're my nachos. It's a wonderful comeback. Do you think that that's true enough of this record? It does seem like quite the melange of influences.
I mean, all the way back to her 2008, 2009 breakthrough album, The Fame, I would say that Gaga has always been an expert pastiche artist. And I don't regard that as an insult. She's taken other influences from Madonna to Bowie and made them her own. That's been true from the jump. And, you know, on this album, there are callbacks to sort of earlier modes. You know, it's good that we started off with Abracadabra, which, you know, recalls the wordlessness of a Poker Face or a Bad Romance, the Rama, Ooh La La, that whole vibe. But it's also got, you know, elements of other acts on it, this album. So, you know, you hear everything from Prince on the song Killa, which if you caught her performance on Saturday Night Live, you probably caught that. It's also got a guitar riff that sounds like Fame by David Bowie. If you listen to the song Zombie Boy, it starts off sounding like Gwen Stefani and then shifts into something that sounds like Duran Duran. But, you know, Gaga has always sort of had a melange of influences, and it's hard to say there's any one Gaga sound. Possibly the strangest single on this whole thing is the song that has been its biggest hit and probably wasn't even supposed to be on the album in the first place, which is her duet with Bruno Mars, Die With a Smile, which is a song that spent a month at number one on the Hot 100. I wrote about it for my Why Is This Song Number One series. And they kind of stumbled into this being the big hit. They dropped it late last summer, almost as a lark, as a Lucy, a side hustle. And it became such a persistent hit, a hit that kind of hung on through the entire fall and winter and wound up at number one just after Christmas, that Gaga kind of swooped it into the album as the album's closing song, but it doesn't sound like it has much in common with the rest of the album, except for the fact, to go back to your original question, Steve, that Gaga has done this mode too. She's done this on Shallow from A Star Is Born. She's done it on tracks like Speechless from The Fame Monster, you know, back in the day. Piano balladry is also a Gaga mode. There are Gaga tropes, but I feel like there's no one Gaga sound, and I think that's one of her strengths as a pop star.
So I'ma love you every night like it's the last night, like it's the last night. If the world was ending, I wanna be next to you. If the party was over and our time on earth was through, I wanna hold you just for a while and die with a smile. If the world was ending, I'd wanna be next to you.
Yeah, talking about that, about her chameleonic talent for self-reinvention, just made me want to talk about her as a presence, not just a singer and a pop music maker, but obviously an actor, right? I mean, a really, really good actor, I would add. Like, it was absolutely startling when Star Is Born came out in 2018 and she was the best thing about the movie. It's just quite rare that pop stars can actually act.
I would even argue that she was the best thing in House of Gucci, which was not a good movie, and yet she was good in it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My group, the New York Film Critics Circle, wound up giving her Best Actress for that House of Gucci role, even though we all agreed that the movie was terrible. And she has, in general, I think, as a star, had this ability to transcend bad material. Like talking about the Joker 2, the Folie à Deux movie, which was terrible, and everyone agreed it was terrible, and it was a huge flop at the box office. But as with House of Gucci, also terrible and a flop, she has this way of wriggling out of bad projects without being sort of stained by them. And I mean, I should also have prefaced this by saying that Lady Gaga is sort of a patron saint in my household. My daughter's a huge fan. Every year on Spotify Wrapped, she's in something like the 0.001 top percent of, Lady Gaga listeners.
Would she call herself a little monster?
Maybe not, because she would not want to be identified as part of a mass fandom, but she did actually once have a brief and very nice encounter with Lady Gaga at an event that Gaga was at. And my daughter went and approached her and asked her about how she prepared for her role in House of Gucci and what kind of sense memory exercises she did. And they had a really sweet conversation. So anyway, I have all kinds of warm feelings toward Lady Gaga. But I was interested, Chris, in hearing you talk about how she positions herself on this new album, compared to in past albums as a celebrity. There's a song about being a celebrity. And, as usual, she's sort of always commenting on the progress of her career as she's making new music.
Well, and her very first album was called The Fame, titled that at a time when she wasn't actually famous. She's been sort of obsessed with this idea of celebrity and sort of the self-mythology of pop stardom from the jump. She had tracks on that first album like Paparazzi, which turned out to be a massive hit later, but she couldn't have known that at the time. And yes, as you point out on this album, she's got the track Perfect Celebrity. Is again one of those self-conscious Gaga songs that, comments on fame even while it revels in fame. She's had previous hits like Applause, I Live for the Applause. So yeah, this is a through line in Gaga's career. You mentioned A Star Is Born, and I did a whole Hit Parade episode about Gaga's career in the wake of A Star Is Born, because one of the things I found fascinating about that, let's not forget, fourth version of A Star Is Born, was that it was almost a meta commentary on Gaga's career in particular. The blend of artifice and authenticity, as I called it, that is the crux of Lady Gaga, because, there was a moment in the middle of Gaga's career where she had an album that was a semi-flop called Art Pop. And then a year later, she was duetting with Tony Bennett on a series of, standards albums. And she even did a performance on the Oscars of a medley of Julie Andrews songs that made everybody sit up and take notice and say, oh, wait a minute, this weirdo can sing. So, Gaga has kind of been toying with artifice and authenticity back and forth throughout her career. And it's in the plot of that version, Bradley Cooper's version of A Star Is Born. So yeah, this is a Gaga obsession, and she's coming right back to it on this album, which I think is probably only warmly nostalgic for her fan base.
So all of that stuff that you just described, Chris, about her music being about fame is usually something that severely turns me off of music. In fact, the Taylor Swift songs that I like the least, as a now Taylor Swift, I guess, fan, due to my daughter's extreme interest in Taylor Swift, are the ones that are about her fame. To me, it seems recursive, and it reminds me of, for example, how Eminem got ruined by becoming obsessed with his own fandom, his own fame, his own sort of exposure. But it sounds like you feel like Gaga does it in a way that kind of transcends that. I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with her kind of continually trying new things or evolving in different ways. Maybe you feel like she sort of has more of a right to comment on it, or has more interesting things to say about it. Well, I don't know. Maybe you disagree with my underlying premise. I do think generally songs about fame are kind of boring, but I like hers.
Well, I think you just captured the dichotomy there because, yeah, you find that topic boring and yet Gaga makes it interesting. To understand and appreciate Lady Gaga, again, because it dates all the way back to her first album, 16, 17 years ago, you kind of have to glom onto her obsession with fame and her deconstruction of fame because that's part of it. What was so fascinating about Gaga when she launched was that she was sort of putting across David Bowie or Prince ideas in a Europop or Madonna-like package. And this blending, not as if Madonna's music didn't get heady at one point in her career. There was that moment in the early 90s where Camille Paglia was writing essays about her and, she was recording tracks like Justify My Love. So it isn't as if Madonna hasn't been heady. But Gaga really redirected the center of the pop conversation in her direction. The aughts was a very hip hop centric decade. And then she kind of moved it back to dance pop such that for the next, 5 years, roughly, everything was kind of in Lady Gaga's image, which is impressive in its way. And I remember that when she first broke in 0809, we pop critics were a little skeptical of her for a couple of months. And then all of a sudden, like, you watch the Poker Face video and you're like, this is a dance pop single that's got something else going on. It's a little smarter than it lets on at first. And a lot of her singles have that ability to kind of project a knowing distance from themselves, such that they're bangers, they're danceable, they're real great fun, but they are deconstructing themselves as they're playing, which is part of what I find so fascinating about Gaga, honestly.
Before we started recording, you said something really interesting, that this is a deep cut record. It's going to sell itself on the hits, but ultimately for you as an album, it's about tracks that aren't going to get that heavy play. Maybe talk a little bit about that as a record and its spirit coming out in unexpected places.
Yeah, and it's funny to use the phrase deep cut. The album just came out a couple of weeks ago, so it's a little too soon to figure out what the deep cuts are going to be. For example, we talked about the Taylor-esque track, How Bad Do You Want Me? I'm convinced at some point they're going to try that on as a single, and once they do, it will no longer be a deep cut. But yeah, as you go from track to track on this album, it's kind of like spot the influence. It's either Gaga doing Gaga or it's Gaga doing Bowie, Duran Duran, Prince, etc. One track that she did on Saturday Night Live that a lot of people have focused on, and it's done with the producer Gesaffelstein, is Killa, which is a blend of Prince and, again, the guitar riff from David Bowie's 1975 hit Fame. That's a great one. And another one that I really like, if you want to play it, is Zombie Boy.
We're about to be up all night, waking up a zombie. So put your paws all over me, you zombie boy, you zombie boy.
Which starts off sounding like the cheerleader chant from Gwen Stefani's Hollaback Girl, and then shifts into something more like a Duran Duran cut, or, something that Nile Rodgers would have produced for David Bowie in 1983. It's kind of got a little bit of everything in it. This is an album of pleasure delivery devices, one after the other. And, your mileage may vary track to track, but, there's really not a skip on this record insofar as if you like, really relentlessly mainstream pop, Gaga is delivering this to you.
All right. Well, Chris, as always, just a huge pleasure talking with you. Thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you so much, Steve. This was fun.
It's a Vichy moment in American history, so said Michael Roth, the president of Wesleyan University, who is gaining a well-earned notoriety as the principal pusher, backer on the Trump administration's attempt to curtail the operations of and control the operations of universities, in contrast to Columbia University, which a week or so ago capitulated completely to Trump's demands. For this segment, I'm going to turn very quickly to Rebecca Onion. Rebecca, you've been in and around universities your whole career. What do you make of the moment that we're confronted with?
It has been so much worse than I anticipated. I was one of the people who foolishly, before Trump was reelected, thought to myself, well, it wasn't that bad last time. Maybe it won't be that bad this time. Probably just due to being overwhelmed by the entire concept of Project 2025. He/they, the people who are executing this, have figured out how every little way, it seems, that the federal government can control universities. So, for a long time in academia, it sort of felt like, okay, so if you're teaching at a state university or a university, a branch campus of a state-funded university, you're sort of politically vulnerable. Like there are moments in red states where legislatures will decide, I'm going to cut a bunch of funding to higher ed because it's not pleasing to my constituents that higher ed gets as much state funding as it does. Or as has happened in the state of Ohio, where I live, where the legislature might say, we're going to do an anti-CRT bill. We're going to make it so that we're going to go in, we're going to try to make professors kind of like be quote unquote accountable for what they teach. And so my perception for a long time has been like, okay, so this is the problem with public universities, but privately funded universities are relatively safe. I was very foolish and naive about that. Privately funded universities are not safe. And in fact, multiple institutions in the past few months have found themselves under pressure through these various sort of levers and mechanisms that the Trump administration has found to try to control private higher education. So there's the Columbia situation where they were threatened with $400 million in cuts into federal funding. There's the University of California kind of like caved to that pressure already and isn't using diversity statements in hiring. The University of Pennsylvania is under threat now because it has allowed transgender athletes to compete in sports. There's just so many examples. Harvard has a hiring freeze despite having what seems like more money than God because they're nervous about what's going to happen. So it turns out the federal government can do quite a bit to private education, private universities and colleges. The question is there anything that can be done? Should Columbia have said, no, we're just going to lose $400 million? And from the outside, it seems very easy to say, yes, that's what they should have done. Now, could it have been possible for them to have done something different? I'm not totally sure. What do you guys think? Did you guys anticipate that this was going to come down the pike? And what are you thinking in terms of what schools should be doing right now?
I mean, I'm really glad that whoever assigned this piece at Slate, the one you edited, that's basically a Q&A about everything you were just outlining, came out when it did, because I didn't understand at all that the government would have this kind of leverage over public or private universities, to tell you the truth. So I don't think that I have the expertise to say what Columbia or any other university should be doing. But one thing that seems very evident from how the Trump administration has reacted to Columbia buckling to their demands is that it's probably, in general, when dealing with an authoritarian government, nonsensical to buckle to their demands, because they will just move the goalposts and increase the demands. And the Trump administration's response to Columbia buckling to everything that they wanted is to issue all kinds of press releases saying these very bullying, obviously sort of trolling things about, well, Columbia still has a long way to go before they get their federal funding, but it's a good first step.
Oh boy.
And it makes it really clear that this is an ideological battle as much as a financial one. That there's this real McCarthyite kind of energy driving this entire thing, and that they're trying not just to defund and destroy higher education, but to psychologically dominate, this class of people that are perceived as somehow the elite eggheads.
Man, it's working. I got to say, I feel like they're coming after like every profession I've ever participated in or wanted to participate in. I sometimes think to myself, I don't know. Steve, is it working on you?
Well, I mean, it's not an accident, right, that they're going after all of those professions. It's not a coincidence at all, and it's Dana, I think, solely an ideological battle. It's not a financial one at all. I mean, their stated goal is to destroy all of the institutions of the quote unquote left. I mean, all of those low to no profit places in which free thought has flourished in a highly profit driven, highly commercialized society. And the principal one would be the universities, which they regard as a sort of petri dish for leftist, Marxist, however, whatever ridiculous right-wing cliche you want to throw at what people do in humanities department in universities. They see it as the seedbed of that, and they want to try to destroy it. Just a little bit of history. I mean, there was this astonishment on the part of Musk, but I'm sure a number of other people that universities get federal grants of the size that they get, at which typically for almost exclusively for the hard sciences, which have practical, are easy to argue for the socially applicable aspects of that kind of research. So weapons, medicines, on and on. As a legacy of the Cold War, when we did radar and the atomic bomb and various other things, mostly in secret during the war, they decided to keep university scientists in place as opposed to just building federal labs from scratch, funneled the research grants through the universities in order to, essentially the Manhattan Project was the big one. And then they left that infrastructure and that whole premise in place. So huge amounts of federal money go through the university. But the thing that surprised Musk, and I think a lot of people who are new to this story, is that there's as much as a 50, even sometimes more % cream off of those grant-winning applications to the general funds of the university. And so the argument, to the extent the Trump administration has one, is that, well, that's scandalous. I can't believe that that's happening. And where does that money go? Well, it funds all of these quote-unquote money losers like the humanities, where we breed new Marxists. All of that is, I think, complete and utter nonsense. For one thing, it doesn't go to the humanities by and large. In fact, you do need to keep the lights on in all kinds of ways that make it necessary to do a pretty heavy cream off in order to keep the infrastructure of the university just generally alive enough to support the science making activities that most of us agree ought to be happening. As to the question that Rebecca raised, which is a really sort of hideously poignant one about what would one do faced with a kind of existential funding crisis from an authoritarian government if you were the president of the university or on its board of trustees, or what would your decision-making process be? To me, a university is only a university if in its intellectual mission it's independent of the prerogatives of the state. And at the instant that it hands over the kinds of things that it has agreed to, Columbia has agreed to in this instance, it ceases functioning as a university. It's a university in name only. It's basically become a research arm of the federal government and nothing more. The other thing is, it's not as if it's going from being an ideological actor in some nefarious way to a totally non-ideological actor by capitulating to this. As Dana says, yes, the goalposts are going to move, but that's where they're going to move to. We've seen this play out in Florida with New College and DeSantis, Governor DeSantis. He did not simply want to put, as in the case of Columbia, a department or two into receivership. Effectively, the entire university was changed over into a place populated entirely by ideological hacks. I think Columbia should have drawn a line in the sand. And the bigger scandal is that not all the universities are coordinating and acting as one and saying, if you are going to do this to, I too am Spartacus. If you do this to one of us, you do it to all of us. We stand and fall together. You cannot destroy the village in order to save it. And they haven't done that. And that is a grotesque failure.
Yeah, Steve, what you say about the sciences versus the humanities is so true. I mean, if you had asked me to predict what will a second Trump administration do to higher education, I certainly would have thought, oh, well, they'll destroy the humanities even further than they've already been destroyed over the past 30 years of hacking away at them. But STEM is STEM. Universities do everything and revolve entirely around their STEM classes. And maybe this is what's been the most startling to me reading about this growing, I don't know what you'd call it, sort of anti-intellectual, anti-education movement, is the brain drain, the deliberate brain drain that these people are putting on their own country. I mean, I guess this is true of so many aspects of the current administration. It's hard to even drill down on just one, but just not having any larger vision of why education matters on the global stage and why America is a place that students from all over the country want to come and research. It's because we have well-funded universities, right? I mean, it isn't because of our humanities departments or whatever they're perceiving, or DEI, whatever they're perceiving as, the kind of wedge way in. It's because there's research institutions that are world class and they're eviscerating that to no purpose. It is just so enraging to witness.
As with so many other things they're doing right now, the biggest revelation is that like they don't really have people. Like there's not enough people that can step in and like become professors at, like, say you were to take all of Columbia, fire all the professors who are somehow sympathetic to, the old Columbia, and try to infuse Trump professors. That doesn't exist. So they sort of have to figure out ways to sap the institutions of power while like kind of keeping them, for economic reasons, if nothing else. And that's just like putting everybody in academia in the position of having to decide. As you say, some people are saying, as it happens in waves in the Trump era, some people in this position are saying, I'm going to try to get a job in England, or I'm going to try to get a job in Europe. Now, everyone who's in academia in Europe is like, there aren't enough jobs here anyway. So don't look at that as like the fallback. But, as many people have pointed out, Germany was in the position before, World War II, before World War I, of being like a research center for the world, the place where, modern chemistry was developed and people sort of like figured out what science was. And they lost a lot of that. So, it can happen. A country can be the center of things and then lose that. And we might be in the process of that right now.
Rebecca, I have a question for you. It's been suggested that among the things that is going on here is that, it's been said that the university kind of neoliberalized over the last 4 decades. Specifically, a lot of people were put in, they became administratively heavy, top-down heavy, with a ton of administrators, all of whom have been, I should say, they have been derided as bean counters, whether they are or not. But and the idea is that because you have bean counters and not educators running the institutions as institutions, there's this massive discrepancy between them and the professoriate in terms of ethos. And so when you strong arm an institution that's run not by professors, not by educators, not by intellectuals, not by people who are paid to be free thinkers and appreciate the protections of tenure and free speech or whatever, but by people who basically are running the joint as a business, their first reaction to possibly losing $500 million or more is that can't happen.
No.
And to them, the baby and the bathwater are completely different for someone like that. The baby is, we've got a $15 billion, $16 billion endowment. That's only a fourth of what Harvard's is. We have to catch up to Harvard. And eventually these things look like hedge funds with classrooms attached, And so as someone who's been close to the university, does that resonate? Or is that a little bit of a stereotype?
I don't think that's a stereotype at all. I think that's one of the biggest problems. The other problem is that, as you guys know, as people who are also involved in academia who aren't working in it anymore, there are, the number of actual people with tenure and protection, that kind of protection has fallen and fallen and fallen, at least in the humanities, let me say, and in the softer social sciences. And so the situation is that the Trump administration is not coming to a bunch of like free thinking professors and asking for this. They're coming to the bean counters, as you say. And then meanwhile, the professoriate is divided and weakened by years of sort of draining away power from teaching and from teaching positions in the universities. And so I've seen some people argue, hey, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe this is a chance for us to like rethink what we should be doing and stop using so many adjuncts and stop relying, stop overproducing PhDs, which is a huge problem. And stop, actually give teachers like protected positions. I think that's sort of blue sky thinking, not Blue Sky the app, Blue Sky the utopian paradigm. I am not sure that anything good is going to come out of this, but I do think it has thrown into sharp relief the fact that the tenure professors are like a tiny a tiny amount of who has power in the academy.
Dana, before we go, you and I both went through PhD programs, felt, if I can speak for you for a second, reshaped by them in critical ways by mentors who meant the world to us. And, we went on and contributed to the GDP by co-creating this podcast. We weren't a profit drain on the United States of America in the long term, I would hope. We weren't. Talk a little bit about just the sense of loss, right? That you, as someone who had that life experience, feel in the face of a really mighty institution being weakened or destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about that sense of, there's just this looking bereft at the wreckage of American academia. I feel like I've experienced that at a much, much lower key, that sensation, for decades now. I mean, because as a humanities scholar, and I'm sure both of you have this experience too,
same.
It just sort of keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And it's like when we went out on the job market, if we did, it was terrible, but it was, paradise compared to what it is now. Also, I think, Steve, having a kid having just started college, as we both do, you have one who's finishing up and one who's just starting. I have one who's in her first year. There's this sense that universities should be a place that's insulated, right? That's insulated from whatever the current political winds are, from this kind of, VC style capital coming in to just essentially break them apart and sell them for parts. It should be, and to some degree, up until this Trump administration came in, still was a place where you can be sheltered from that long enough to spend some time thinking and learning and reading, that there's actually a place, the way that medieval monks copied out manuscripts, right, as barbarians were at the gates, that there was some place that civilization could be sort of preserved and passed on. And the sense that the universities themselves, even our top Ivy League schools like Columbia and Penn, are not valuing that, gives you a real sense of just, I mean, we're almost reduced to our caves now,
oh my gosh,
keep your books in waterproof cases because pretty soon, they're going to be coming to whatever, burn them or something. It's a real sense that anything that is not out on the capitalist market for sale for sheer profit is worthless to society, and there's no place to preserve it.
Dana, I totally agree with you. And my 4 years in undergrad and 7 years in my PhD program were wonderful times for me. But I sometimes worry that having experienced, that much humanities higher education at different formative times in my life has ill prepared me for this moment in a way, because I just want to say, my defense of the university is romantic with a big R, in a way, because I just it's so intertwined with my life and my soul. And I think we have a problem in trying to defend the university to the larger American public, which is slowly losing faith in the university, measurably, by, Pew Center polling, year over year, faith in higher education is falling. And I feel like we need to figure out new ways to defend it that are not capitalist, but also don't kind of over rely on just how amazing it was when I took that American history class and realized how fascinating the Puritans were. I'm not sure that's something that can be a defense anymore, but we need to find a synthesis.
That's beautifully put, Rebecca, and I totally agree with that. It's like our own grad school, capital R romanticism, just is completely inert to anyone outside of that system and inflammatory, right? It just sounds like this wildly luxurious indulgence to have had that, even though I don't in some respects believe it is. We need to go. This segment went long, but one thing I would say is that, listen, the Cold War was in many ways a McCarthyite disaster and deformed this country in lasting ways. But the one thing we felt very strongly when the Cold War got going in the late 40s and early 50s is we had to prove to the world that we were not what the Soviets said we were, which was Philistines and godless communists and commercial degenerates. And we funded the arts and we funded the universities and we funded the humanities in part to prosecute that case. I mean, the number of genuinely beautiful, socially beautiful things that happened under the rubric of national defense during the post-war decades and warped them in many respects, but they also made them flush with money and purpose that are now unfortunately withering on the vine is a heartbreak we're going to be living with for a long time. Anyway, all right. Well, this is a subject I'm sure a lot of our listeners have a lot to say about, and a subject in particular I think we'd love to get feedback on. So, but for now, let's move on. Today's episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. You know that feeling when you're trying to book a trip, too many choices, too much fine print, no real way to know if you're actually getting the best deal? Smart Travel helps you skip that stress and book with confidence. NerdWallet's travel journalists break down the pros and cons of travel decisions, like when lounge access is worth paying for, how a travel agent could save you money, and which hotel loyalty programs give you the best value. Julia, I know that you have a big trip coming up. What are your strategies, tactics, etc.?
Yeah, I'm like a funny combo of a researcher and an explorer. I like to do just enough research that I can feel like I haven't done too much, if that makes sense. I feel like I can feel like I'm discovering it on the ground. But my tip is to make a digital map. Basically put everything that I'm interested in on one app on my laptop so I can like see bird's eye view where there are little clusters of things I'm excited about. And then when I get there, I can just go wander around that neighborhood and pretend I'm discovering everything serendipitously. But I love getting a few trusted tips, seeding that map, and then kind of letting serendipity have its way.
That is the perfect balance, right? Like orient yourself just enough so that you can get lost. Lovely. I love it.
Exactly. You want it, but productively lost, not just like actually lost.
Not lost.
Some dumpy outskirt.
Yes. I've yet to master that art. I'm a prime candidate for this product. So before you book, learn how to get the most out of your travel dollars. Follow Smart Travel on your favorite podcast app.
Our next sponsor is Audible, and the occasion for the sponsorship is Sunrise on the Reaping, which is the new audiobook in the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. We discussed, I think, the very first Hunger Games movie on this show. I read the whole original series, and my son has just started them. So this is, I remember, a very addictive world to join, and I'm now witnessing that in the next generation. So in Sunrise on the Reaping, you can hear Jefferson White narrate the story of the survivor, young Hamish Abernathy, and revisit the world of Panem 24 years before the original Hunger Games series. So it's a prequel. I use Audible all the time, and this book will be available there. Welcome to the 50th Hunger Games. Experience the worldwide best-selling series in a whole new way. Go to audible.com/sunrise and listen with the world.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. At Saks.com, it's easy to find your new spring vibe. Whether it's refreshing your whole wardrobe or shopping for a vacation, Saks.com can make it fun and inspiring. Saks.com is personalized with arrivals from brands picked just for you, so it's easy to find inspiration for your everyday. You can shop for anything on your agenda, like a larger-than-life Balenciaga bag for work or a Zimmermann dress for an upcoming wedding. Find inspiration for your personal style every day at Saks.com.
All right, before we go any further, this is the moment in our podcast where we discuss business. Dana, what do you have?
It is indeed, Steve. Our only item of business this week is to tell listeners about our Slate Plus bonus episode. It'll be available to Slate Plus members in their feeds separate from the main show. Today, all three of us, Steve, Rebecca, Onion, and I, will discuss our feelings about gossip. This comes from a review of a new book about gossip. You Didn't Hear This From Me by Kelsey McKinney, who you might know as one of the co-creators of the Normal Gossip podcast. We're going to talk about our feelings about gossip in our own lives and in culture in our Slate Plus segment this week. If you're a Slate Plus member, you'll hear that separate from the main show in your feed. If you're not a Slate Plus member, please become one by going to slate.com/culture plus. In addition to bonus segments like the one I just described, you'll also get unlimited access to all of the writing and all of the podcasting on slate.com. When you're a Slate Plus member, you're helping the magazine stay afloat, and we really appreciate your support. So please sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Once again, that's slate.com/cultureplus, or you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. All right, back to the show.
Now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse. Dana, what do you have?
All right, since we talked about Lady Gaga with Chris Molanphy for one of our main segments this week, I'm going to endorse a Gaga song that comes from the album from the Joker Folie à Deux. So as we discussed in our segment, it's not a great movie. It is, in fact, a terrible movie. The companion album, Harlequin, that came out is actually an okay album. It's not Lady Gaga's best standards album, but Gaga singing standards is always going to be good. She just is such a great interpreter, I think, of the classic American songbook. And it should be noted that that album, Harlequin, is not a soundtrack to the movie. It's not the versions of the songs that appear in the movie. It's more like a studio album that's sort of inspired by the movie with some of the same songs in more polished versions. I'm not endorsing the entire album because I think it's just okay. I'm endorsing one particular cover, That's Life, which has, for me, kind of become one of the pick-me-up songs for the Trump 2 administration. It's a really fantastic interpretation of that song, most famously sung by Sinatra. Gaga brings a sort of similar scrappy energy to it to Sinatra's, but it's also a different interpretation, including some slightly different lyrics. She's a pauper, a poet, a pirate, a pawn, and a queen instead of a king like Sinatra. And it's just a really punchy interpretation of a great American song, the best thing on the album by far. And I occasionally put it on just to get me through the day. That's Life by Lady Gaga.
Wonderful. Rebecca, what do you have?
Okay, so I'm endorsing a movie called The Fall, which is a 2006 movie that was directed by Tarsem Singh. That was unavailable streaming for a long time, but the streaming service Mubi has restored it in 4K and put it up to watch. So I watched it with my husband and child, who is 8, and she really loved it as well. So if you have a slightly advanced movie child, you might enjoy watching it with them. This is, I don't understand how this movie was even made. It stars Lee Pace, who people might know from the TV show A Halt and Catch Fire, and a child actress called Katina Untaru, who I don't think ever did anything else. She doesn't have a Wikipedia page, but she's absolutely incredible in this. Speaking of really good child actors and actresses, it's a movie about a stuntman who tries an impossible stunt to impress a woman. He ends up in a hospital with a serious injury. This is set in the 1920s. He meets a little 5 or 6-year-old girl, that's the aforementioned Katina Untaru, who comes from an immigrant family of orange pickers that are from Romania and who sort of speaks English with an extremely adorable accent, gorgeous accent. She's fallen and broken her arm. So they're recovering together in the hospital, and he tells her this elaborate story. So it toggles back and forth between images of the story, which takes place in all these exotic locations, and then the story of these two in the hospital becoming friends. And from top to bottom, it's absolutely beautiful and heartbreaking. I don't know how they made this movie. I don't know how they found this child actress, but I loved watching it, and so did my kid.
Oh, that sounds like a great movie. And I love Lee Pace. Totally going to look for that.
Oh, Dana, he's absolutely gorgeous in this too. Speaking of gorgeous.
All right. I have a kind of multi-layered endorsement, but I'll try to make it quick. I went to go to the Brooklyn Academy of Music, BAM, to see the production of Streetcar Named Desire that came over from London. Its most famous feature is that Paul Mescal is playing Stanley Kowalski, trying to exist in the shadow of Brando, which is hard to do. Mescal's actually quite good. I wasn't thinking of Brando the entire time. It's a very, let's put it this way, like it's a very self-consciously original production of it. It's a minimalist stage with some kind of slightly freaky pomo touches. There's sort of dance elements incorporated, all things that would put me off. It doesn't matter in the end because the performances I actually think it's a beautiful production in many ways, in part because the words and the actors are both utterly primary. But in particular, I was floored by the Blanche, played by an actress named Patsy Ferran, who hasn't done a lot, isn't overly famous, deserves to be, is probably going to be now. She has a small part in Mickey 17. She just brought so much power and suffering to this Blanche. It's the best Blanche I've ever seen. But it's very hard to see this production. It's probably not going to be there that much longer, and it's expensive as fuck, and it's in New York City. So a lot of people listening can't take advantage of this endorsement. Therefore, what I'm really endorsing is reread the play. It's just better than you remember. But also, I had the incredible experience of discovering someone wrote about not only that production, but was at the performance I was at and had exactly my reaction and wrote about it so beautifully, better than I ever could have. Lauren Theisen, or perhaps Theisen, Theisen. I'm sorry, Lauren, I don't know how to pronounce your name, wrote a piece called Four Blanches about the four Blanches that she's seen in her course of watching it, including Vivian Leigh famously in the movie, and why Patsy Ferran brought something new and ferocious to this one. And she captured it beautifully, and she fixed upon this monologue that I'd completely forgotten. We all remember Stella, and we all remember The Kindness of Strangers. I mean, there's all these iconic moments from the play and the movie that everyone remembers. The one that I didn't remember is when Blanche first encounters her sister, Stella, she begins describing kind of resentfully, there's this sort of flood of words that comes out of her about all the suffering and death that Blanche was forced to put up with, having stayed behind on their family plantation. And it's Williams at the height of his power. And it had never stood out to me, but it's sort of a crucial moment in the play. It sort of describes what this woman has been going through, aside from all of the other things that we later find out that she's been going through right up front. Anyway, that's an amazing piece of writing. It's now up on Defector. It originally was on Lauren Thiesen's Substack, but it's now on Defector. We'll link to it, Four Blanches. It's amazing. All right, well, that's our show. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us. It's always just so great to talk to you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Dana, thanks for chatting.
Total joy.
You will find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Bertel. Our producer is Victoria Whitley-Berry. For Dana Stevens and Rebecca Onion, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.